Hi everyone, my name is Rena Slavin. I'm a Global Voices Metcalf intern at International House, and I have the great privilege of talking to Doyle Armbrust and Maeve Feinberg of the Spektral Quartet, who will be presenting a concert this evening at International House. The Spektral Quartet is a ensemble in residence in the Department of Music at the University of Chicago and has been a fixture of the Chicago new music scene, receiving multiple accolades, including a Grammy nomination this past year. Before we dive in, guys, I just wanted to find out if you could talk a little bit about how this quartet was formed.
Sure. We need to come up with a better origin story, I'm afraid. But essentially there were four of us that knew each other kind of from around town, just from freelancing and things like that. And we decided just to get together and hang out and sight read string quartets. And somehow, kind of without us even realizing it, it morphed into something more serious. And what turned into a hangout with a six-pack of beer and a big stack of quartets. The beer was excised very quickly, and then all of a sudden we were playing our first concert in, I think, 2010.
Very cool. So from what you've made public to us through like your open rehearsal programs and stuff like this, and also from the fact that you guys switch off first and second violin in performance a lot, it seems that you have a fairly egalitarian division of labor. And that's not maybe what most people would think of when they think of string quartets. And I mean, some of the earlier repertoire, like 18th century repertoire, would sort of dictate the leadership role of the first violin. But I think you see this, and even in like observational studies that have been conducted with string quartets, you see that this is still kind of a pretty pervasive sentiment, even though there's a whole host of other repertoire beyond the 18th century. So I guess I'm wondering how you guys have managed to strike a pretty productive balance given your democratic approach, or at least what seems to be a democratic approach.
I think, one thing that is maybe different about us as a string quartet as opposed to other groups is that we really do try to do sort of, and as even a mix as we can achieve of old and new music. And like, as you say, there's a lot of different challenges for both sides of that. And I think that, sort of more standard repertoire, there is sort of a more stratified role between the first and second violins, but I think the fact that we play such a wide range of repertoire, and it's not just time period, but also even within the modern stuff that we do, there's so much variation in type of music and genre and the technical requirements. So I think, we try to play to our strengths, but we also, we get the opportunity to learn the challenges of different things and sort of get to, for myself, I've played a lot more second violin in my life, and I think, I've been playing mostly first parts when we're doing more modern stuff, and it's something that I feel like has taught me a lot about how to lead in that type of way, especially with rhythmic stuff. But I think, no matter who's sitting where, our rehearsal process is very even, and we kind of rely on all of ourselves to really be in the mix.
Yeah, in terms of the business of the quartet, and that's the part that doesn't get talked about so often, but in essence, we're running a small business. We were really lucky when we started the group that our skill sets sort of landed in the areas that we needed them to. So our cellist, Russ, who's our executive director, has one of those minds and one of those workaholic mentalities that just really fits that role very well. I've always done a lot of writing about music, and so PR was kind of a natural fit for me. And then Maeve is our newest member and currently handling kind of a whole host of things. And Clara is running point on programming and kind of interacting with composers and things like that. So we're lucky in that way. And of course, the more that we've grown, because we're non-for-profit, we have a board. And so we've tried to kind of fill the gaps in terms of the skill sets that we need to be able to actually run the business, which takes as much or more time than rehearsing.
That's surprising. But yeah, so both of you mentioned that you do try to combine old and new music. So something that I've been curious about is what's harder for you? The fact that you're performing music written by a composer that's alive and maybe even in the room, or performing music written by somebody to whose artistic vision you really don't have much access, and the best you can do is sort of extrapolate.
That's a good question. I think that, there really are just, advantages and disadvantages to both, and I think that variety is something that I really value, and I think it's like one of the reasons that this is the group that I would want to be in. I think with standard rep, there is this advantage of there being, a history to it, and there's performance practice, and so there's sort of a more standardized or accepted version of things, and that can be a double-edged sword, I think. Mm-hmm. So there's more history, there's more, study and research, and so oftentimes I think when we approach an old piece of music, the starting point is more advanced. We kind of know this is how it goes, this is how people play this part, and then we can decide for ourselves, do we want to diverge or not. Sometimes we look at a new score and it's like, it might not even have normal notations, there are techniques we don't understand how to do yet. So sometimes I think that there's like a barrier of entry, but I've also found that some of the most rewarding experiences I've had have been when the composer is in the room. And it's not just because you're getting like a direct flow of information and you're getting a sort of like accurate first person view of how to execute things, but you're also, I find that it's easier for myself, we'll get a score and maybe I like the piece already and we're working on it, but the second that the composer is in the room and you're hearing their process, what they were going through when they wrote it, what they were thinking about, I just get more invested, and I think there's also a real pride that comes with being the first person to play something and really feeling like you're championing that piece, and the way that you present it to the public for maybe the first time really matters, and you really sort of like, it is a collaboration with that person, because the group plus whoever that is have sort of like birthed the piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think tonight's concert is a great example of what it is that we're trying to do. So we're giving the world premiere of Chris Trapani's Isolario Book 2. I think there's maybe a misperception amongst sort of like non-new music people that because something has never been heard, that there's some kind of like safety in that people don't know how it's supposed to sound. But the truth is that if you spend any amount of time with this music, like every piece has its own language, and once you understand the language, you can understand whether or not it's being executed well. So there's nothing to hide behind in terms of the fact that no one knows what it's supposed to sound like. It'll either be effective or it won't. And then with something like the Schubert Rosamunde that we're playing, there was a time in my life when I would have been worried about sort of like the specter of history and all of the great quartets that have played this piece before. But I don't know, we exist as a group in part, I think, to tear down ideas of things like canons, and the idea that something should be played a certain way, I think, is just buying into kind of the colonialist aspect of classical music, which I don't think any of us really buy into at this point. On the other hand, like, you can't escape the fact that, like, if the Guarneri Quartet has played this piece, like, I really love how they play this piece. But that said, I don't know, the more time goes by, the less I get hung up by that. Because really it becomes a process of discovery of what can we find in this music that resonates with us, because that's the only way we're going to give anything resembling an authentic performance. It's not about playing it the right way, it's about playing it in a way that we're actually saying something with the music.
It's the only way to offer something new, I think, at this point.
Right. Otherwise we're just regurgitating or like, just after some kind of museum piece over and over.
Right. That makes sense. Could you talk a little bit about the new piece by Chris Trapani on the program today?
Sure, yeah, we can both say something about it. We got a call kind of late from the American Academy in Rome. I think we were sort of swooping in to fill in for somebody else, as I recall. But in any case, we ended up on this flight to Rome. We were playing music by two composers, one of which was Chris, and we were playing two of his pieces. One of them was Isolario, the first book. And it was all very intense because we had a very short amount of time to put it together. But we're in Rome and it's amazing, and but we really fell in love with his approach to music. He has an incredible way of, I think, not just sort of like bringing folkloric music or sort of native music into conversation with classical music, but actually really kind of giving himself over to these field recordings that he makes on in some cases, these fairly distant islands or places that are not sort of tourist traps. And so the piece that he's written, that we played in Rome and that then we commissioned, well, I guess the Kusevitsky Fund commissioned it, but the piece that we had written for us by him is sort of a combination of field recordings from like a certain area of Cuba and certain islands in Greece and things like that. So there are these kind of natural sounds involved, both of the environment and of performances that are happening in kind of a village square. But then he's also done an incredible amount of work of using live electronics, so things that we're doing like tapping the instrument or flicking the string or using our palm on the back of the instrument are actually triggering things that are happening, and those sounds largely are coming from these same kind of field recordings. So there's this really kind of amazing melding that happens between both the recorded sound, the electronics, and then the live performance.
Yeah, I think, to me, one of the things that I find the coolest about this piece is just like the way he's integrated the strings and electronics and the degree to which he's integrated them. I think like a lot of sort of new music right now, it's using like standard instruments, acoustic instruments, and using extended techniques to sort of imitate a lot of different things that we have associations with. And then there's like a lot of electronic music being made that I think, is sample based, and that's, to me, in a way, like really kind of relevant right now because it is, has the ability to sort of draw from anywhere, anytime. And I think that's sort of like how our brains work these days. There's constant input and there's sort of this ability to jump between time periods and countries and all these different sources. And so what's so cool to me about playing this piece is that we really are doing both. We are playing our instruments, we are playing a quartet, it is chamber music, and we do have that element of, learning how to use instruments in new ways to sort of evoke different effects and different things that, you have a connotation about. But also, we're not just playing along with a backing track. We really are, we're both imitating the electronics, we sometimes are acting as controlling devices, and the fact that it's, field recordings that, he took in real time himself, and he had that experience that we're recreating in a hall, and the fact that we're also then using our instruments as, to me, it's like more than an instrument. It is sort of, because we're triggering these different sound files. You have all the associations of a string quartet on stage and the associations of these wooden instruments, and then you're also hearing gongs and gamelons and all these different sounds. And so I think there's something really like groundbreaking and relevant about having that in a live music atmosphere, because it's something that is both live performance and also sound installation.
There's an aspect of it that classical music has a long tradition, of course, of composers sort of like pilfering different traditions and sort of adapting it to varying degrees of success and or ethics, or consideration. And the thing that I think is going to be clear to anybody that listens to the piece is that Chris really approaches this from a place of curiosity, genuine curiosity. So these are places that he's traveled to, and it's not simply slapping something that he's found into his own music. To me, like, he gets fascinated by sort of the tuning of the instruments, for instance, that he's capturing in these recordings. And so we do a lot of microtonal playing that's meant to emulate what's happening here. So it feels very thoughtfully done as he goes through, and the electronics are kind of so sophisticated that we actually have our own, the Grammy Foundation in France has lent us Max, who is just kind of this genius of electronic music, and we literally could not be playing this piece without both the composer and this electronic musician at the same time in the room with us, because they are actually kind of riding the knobs as we're playing.
Yeah, I think like also the thing we were saying before about what it is to be playing a piece of new music and have the composer in the room. Like, one of the coolest things about this process is you'll get the score and you'll practice this microtonal passage and you don't really know what you're going for, and it sounds out of tune to our ears maybe, and then Chris will play us the sound file, and it's either it's some sort of Turkish singing or it's bagpipes, and then suddenly you realize like, oh, that's what I'm embodying in this part, and I think like it makes it feel much more real as we're playing it.
So you've chosen to pair this with the late string quartet of Schubert, which might seem from a non-insider point of view to be kind of an odd pairing. But there is a geographic connection of sorts, right? Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, this is we like to theme our seasons and our concerts, and occasionally we paint ourselves into a little bit of a corner. In this case, we understood at least the sound world of what Chris was going to be writing without having actually heard the piece. So we had that in mind. The connection between there being sort of a mention or an allusion to Cypress in the Rosamunde quartet is really just a reason for us to be able to title this Enchanted Islands. So that's really more just marketing. But in terms of
cut that part out of it.
yeah.
Okay.
No, but I mean I like owning that, because that's we take a lot of care with what we sort of like put out in the world, and sometimes they're like incredibly inextricably linked thematic ties in between pieces. In this case, it was really something sonic, and taking Schubert, who's writing at like literally the most depressed point of his entire life. His health is completely fallen apart, and he's having no success being an opera composer, which is what he really wants to be doing. And yet he writes this piece that's like alternately moody and charming and like harmonically really. There are a lot of interesting left turns in this piece, and to me that's one of the points of interest of Chris's music too, is that because the harmonic language is something out of our ordinary, that it goes to places that maybe are a little bit unexpected.
I think also I'm really excited about this program and also the concert order we picked. I think a lot of times when it's not a new thing to do programs where old and new music are on the same concert, but I think oftentimes there'll be sort of like a standard piece or a couple of standard pieces, and the new music pieces either get it over with in the beginning and then give people sort of like the gratification at the end, or sort of tucked in the middle somewhere, and it feels like very purposefully sort of positioned and bookended by more palatable stuff. And we chose to start tonight's concert with Schubert, and I'm really excited about starting with it because I think it's a great piece and everyone will love to hear it, and it feels like a really intimate way to start a concert. And also I think it really it gives a cool platform to Chris's piece, which is kind of like zooming out. It's the Schubert, it feels aesthetically so much more compact, and then these are two books of short movements. Every movement is a different island, and because it's 4-channel spatialized surround sound, there is like this another dimension to it that I think is it's kind of going to get its due in a way, having it be on the second half of the program.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I am very much looking forward to this, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.